Allow me to introduce my panelists today. You all know them. I'm sure you know them very well. You follow them on social media. You watch them in Parliament. You certainly watch them saying what many think sometimes, but don't necessarily say. Welcome, please, Bantu, Holomisa, Nomboniso, Gasa, and Sipho, Pityana. Huge round of applause for them. Right here. Yes. In fact, let's sit there and I'll sit here. I didn't realize. What future South Africa? 3 people who I really think can help us answer that question this afternoon. And I'm going to ask them each to give us a few minutes of their time while answering that question. What does the future look like for you, especially with December 16th looming? General Bantu, Holomisa.
Well, first of all, we can no longer pin our hopes on the current ruling party. They have been on a back foot since 2008, when they took a decision to support President Zuma, who was a criminal suspect, and ascended him or took him to the union buildings. Today, as we speak, they are fighting amongst themselves. Unfortunately, that infighting has affected the day-to-day administration of South Africa. The capital outflow is also creating a havoc. The would-be investors are no longer sure whether to come to South Africa. It's worse because we are still guessing. What if so-and-so wins? What does that mean? So we must brace ourselves that up until 2019, when the voters of South Africa will give a fresh mandate to current political parties and future parties, to say you are pinning your hopes on the ANC currently as to who will win. Of these 3 or 4 presidential hopefuls, they have been there. They have been defending President Zuma and threatening the caucus. And today they say they want to be the presidents of South Africa? Give me a break, please.
Nomboniso.
Well, I think that December 16, or the next conference of the ANC, is not as significant as we would like to believe. I think it's important that we also look beyond President Zuma and accept the fact that the rot is at so many different levels. So I think as South Africans, we have to think and imagine the kind of society that we want to have with or without the ANC. I think it's important to say, perhaps, yes, it might be good, Zuma must leave, and I don't think that it would be sustainable for the country to go with President Zuma and this level of corruption that he is presiding over until 2019. We just cannot afford that. As we sit, he's declared free education, he's done all these kinds of things. We don't have any kind of sense of planning, any kind of sense of thought processes. The high-level panel that is chaired by former President Kgalema Motlanthe has looked at an entire slew of legislation that has been passed by Parliament at all sectors. And those kinds of legislations, in fact, some of them are an antithesis of what the Constitution stands for. So I think what we need to be talking about is what kind of future are we envisaging? What is it that we as South Africans want to do? And if the ANC wants to follow, they can do so, but I think they can no longer lead.
It's up to the people to lead.
Yes.
Sipho, Pityana, your take, future for South Africa, what is it?
Well, the amazing thing is that, you know, if you take a rotten cake and you put icing sugar on it, it doesn't stop being a rotten cake. So the December event, for all intents and purposes, is about putting icing sugar on a rotten cake. What the ANC has failed to do is to accept that it is corrupt and bankrupt and so to the core. In December, there's going to be an election of a new leadership in the ANC whose credibility and integrity will not be beyond question. So the chances are that you're going to have a leadership with tested and proven credentials in corruption, either at local government level or at provincial level or at national government level. I'm not an IT person, but IT people say garbage in, garbage out. So, if you are going to be led by the same caliber of people who produced a Jacob Zuma and the kind of corruption that we've seen to this point, it is highly unlikely that the trajectory is going to be different after December. Don't forget, ANC has its back up against the wall. And its back is up against the wall only because the people have risen and challenged it and questioned it. It has lost its hegemony in society. It has lost its ideological anchor. It is a rudderless organization. You now have the New Deal. You have the new growth path. You have industrial IPAP. You have the NDP. I don't know what the vision that is being presented to the people of South Africa is in terms of the future, and who and how you engage in terms of what we are about. So here you have a rudderless party. South Africans are being very generous in speculating about the good and bad amongst the leaders that are likely to be elected. The fact of the matter is that all of them were part of the election of Zuma, not once, but twice. All of them were part of defending Zuma and all his transgressions that they are attacking today. Many times, all of them were reduced into a force that legitimated the corrupt dispensation that we have in society today. The people of South Africa owe it to those who delivered the freedom of this country to ensure that ANC gets punished for what it has done to this country.
Just last month, you said it's a disgrace that Jacob Zuma has not been removed from office. Do you still stand by that?
I stand by that because I believe that an ANC that is rooted to the founding principles of that organization, an ANC that played an important part in creating one of the best vision for any society that the South African Constitution is, had a duty and a responsibility to remove Jacob Zuma. They became a force when everybody in society, the trade unions, the churches, business community, the youth, opposition political parties, all of whom you could say represent the totality of society, said, you must remove this person from power. And they did everything to defend him. The image of Jacob Zuma has become the image of the ANC, inescapably.
Bantu, Holomisa, you talk about the future of South Africa very clearly with 2019 in mind. What's going to happen to the country should Jacob Zuma not be removed between December of this year and 2019?
Well, the situation will be worse. But on the other hand, it will help the opposition parties as well as other parties which are outside parliament. Unfortunately, it will continue to cause harm to the economy of South Africa. It will also continue we will continue to see the lack of leadership at national level, and lastly, the anarchy we are witnessing on a daily basis, and also the criminality and violence will still be on the rise. But what we should be looking at now, leave Zuma aside, as a nation, we should be concerned about how can we involve the sectors of our society to make sure that, one, we address these issues related to the economy, including the sidelining of the majority citizens in the economic mainstream. Linked to that is the issue of the land, the securities, and so on, as well as the education. We need to identify certain pillars in those areas. The best way to do it is not to rely or wait for 2019 elections, because this country doesn't deserve a one-party dominance anymore. We have seen that one-party dominance breeds corruption. Therefore, we need to pull up our socks and fix our country. It is for that reason that the UDM has been calling for a national convention, wherein we can meet as different sectors of our society. If you say you've got a land policy which says, let's do this, your economic policy of Cyril or ANC, they come up with this, UDM, DA, let us all sit under one roof and say, since 1994, let's look at the road we have traveled. Are there any inherent defects in the system we have built, in the road? And if we identify them, how do we fix them? That would include, therefore, the debate about economic freedom, because I was there when we got political freedom. And Madiba made it clear from the word go that there is a lot which still needs to be done. That included the economic setup. So, in other words, there's a lot of work which we need to do. I'm happy to report today that the opposition parties bought into this idea of a national convention, and we have already finalized a draft problem statement which summarizes the current problems: economy, land issues, education, health, the collapsing infrastructure, unemployment, high levels of poverty. But we're more interested now on the how. How do we fix that? We cannot do it only as parliamentarians only. We need a buy-in from society, because the ANC, which we trusted, has abandoned the people or abandoned the original agenda, that of helping everybody of South Africa.
Let's talk state capture. Many of us are walking around with dark rings under our eyes today, watching the Eskom inquiries in Parliament up until late last night. It seems to be unraveling, Nomboniso. Is there any way to bring it back and to undo the damage that's been done by state capture?
Well, I think that it's going to take time. A lot of countries that have experienced state capture of this magnitude have taken a long time to recover from it. And here you're not just talking about corruption. You're not just talking about an exploitative system. I know Nzwanele Manye and them, they talk about what monopoly capital. But here you are talking about a class, a group of people who have hollowed out the state in terms of resources and hollowed out the state in terms of the institutions of the state. If you saw when Brian Molefe was being interviewed in the Eskom inquiry, it was quite interesting. One of the people who asked the question asked him about, so weren't you surprised that so-and-so and so-and-so is linked to this person, and this person is linked to that person, this person is married to that person, this one is, and they all work at this sort of different level. And it is when you start making these kinds of connections that you see that similar names and similar, this is a web. And to undo this web is going to take a long time. But I believe very strongly that we are at a point where people must go to jail. That's the first thing. We can no longer there was a time when I thought, okay, if President Zuma can leave, it's fine. He's somebody that I never thought should have been the president in the first place, but he's there, and maybe he can leave gracefully. We've long passed that point. He has to wear that orange overall and serve his time in jail. Because if we live in a country where theft, I mean, here we are talking about money that is taken from the poor, right? Here we're talking about the level of theft that ensures that even the kinds of appointments that you make, whether it's a police commissioner, whether it's somebody who's going to be a CEO of an institution that is vital for people's livelihood on a daily basis, the calculations are made in such a way that these are people that are going to protect the president. So I think if the ANC wants to have any role in the society, firstly, they must remove President Zuma and remove themselves. Thank you very much. And some of them must actually stand trial, because I think there has to be a strong message in terms of that. Secondly, I think that the most unfortunate thing about this level of state capture is that the institutions of state, as you were saying, are almost running on an autopilot. No, people are not making decisions. In the Eastern Cape, there are two people here. We are concerned about life esidimeni. We have no idea of how many other people who are mentally ill have died. In the Eastern Cape, there are only two mental institutions where you can still take your loved one. It's in Fort Beaufort and Uitenhage. No, the one in Queenstown is a shell of itself. These are places where people go and wait to die. That is the level of the rot. That is the level of inhumanity. That is the level of pain that South Africans live with every day.
And I'm glad you brought us there, because I think you make a very, very good point. I want to read two news stories that are currently in our news cycle at the moment. The first one. By the time Dr. Kwena Selaki Matlala examined Michael Komape's body 2 days after his death, the 6-year-old's body was infested and riddled with maggots. On the 20th of January 2014, Michael stepped out of his grade 1 classroom to go to the toilet. He fell into a dilapidated pit toilet and he drowned, his body filled with maggots. Just let that sink in, that in South Africa in 2014, a 6-year-old grade 1 child died in a toilet. A woman has revealed how she found her brother's naked body at a mortuary underneath other corpses. She turned him over, only to discover that his eyeballs had also been removed. 80-year-old Reverend Joseph Mabwe was stunned the day he finally managed to track down his son Billy. Billy was moved from Life esidimeni to an NGO in Hammanskraal without any consultation. His father says he was dehydrated, hungry, filthy, smelly. I got a call and I heard a faint voice at the other end of the line. I asked who it was. Papa, it's Billy. It made me so happy to hear him. But when he saw him, he was absolutely shocked at the state of him. I was stunned. He was disgruntled. He was hungry. He was filthy. After finding his son had hardly eaten, he got him some foods and snacks. He said he even ate the plastic of the chip packet that he gave him. He was so hungry. A few days later, Billy was dead. This is the reality of where we are at the moment. So how do we deal with this, and how do we talk about a future, rather, when this is the very gruesome reality of what's going on at the moment? Life is cheap. Sipho.
Nomboniso is right. There must be accountability. Those that are responsible must be arrested and they must spend time in jail. But importantly, one of the things that has happened with the campaign that we've launched against state capture has been the mobilization of the international community. And the banks are now coming forward and are ready to expose how much of this money is doing rounds internationally. That money must be brought back to South Africa. It must return here. Because it's all very well for the architect, one of the architects of state capture who now occupies Treasury, Malusi Gigaba, to say, we are going to go cap in hand to the IMF to ask for a bailout. The first thing before we go to IMF to ask for a bailout is that we must get the money that he and others have taken out of this country back here. Unfortunately, we're now being entertained again to this idea that as soon as Jacob Zuma is gone, it's all going to be a land of milk and honey. There are going to be jobs created and all of these things done. The reality of the matter is that the damage that has been caused by state capture has been tremendous. It has represented the externalization of jobs in the manufacturing sector and in other sectors. It has caused huge crisis of confidence in various sectors of the economy. It has made South Africa a very difficult place to invest in. To reverse all of that is going to take years. Far from making promises to South Africans, I think political leaders need to have a realistic conversation with South Africa. We are going to face austerity in its face. We are going to go through a hard time after Zuma is gone, to clean up the mess and to begin to do the things that we need to do to restore this economy back in its course. Many people forget that unlike most countries, we have a constitutional mandate to deliver an equitable society. The constitution and the vision of the society is to have a government that has a bias towards the poor. It's about lifting those that have lived a life in poverty so that the likes of Michael don't die in pit toilets. So you take from the rich and you give to the poor. You enable the upliftment of the poor. The poor are capable of lifting themselves, but the state today is an enemy of the poor. It steals from the poor. It facilitates the exploitation of the poor. It facilitates the humiliation and the degradation of the poor. Now, you need something different in the state system to change that order. There is nothing in what the ANC says today that suggests that they get it. In fact, one of the biggest problems is that if you look at the candidates for leadership of the ANC today, they are people who should be socializing themselves to spend their time in a retirement village somewhere. Old people. We need to rediscover a sense of confidence in youth leadership, a new vision, a sense of appreciation for a new direction that is innovative, fresh thinking. The reason why we're in a rut is because we have all these people who think they're entitled to lead us, they know where they want this country to go to, and yet they don't have a clue.
Haven't people lost faith in politicians, though? And I'm going to ask the politician on the panel.
Well, it's possible that they have, but why they keep on voting for politicians? But on a serious note, we would need, after 2019, we would need a highly trained civil service. We would need to make sure that the policy of deploying people, and this deployment is only confined to certain people who carry a certain membership card.
But you have a big job on your hands if you're going to reinstill this faith in politicians. And we hear it, we read it all the time. You've got a big job on your hands for 2019.
It's a big job, but give us the instrument and the mandate. We will be joining the credible institutions like our judiciary has been so far. We will be assisted by our independent media. And of course, the role of the opposition parties in this country in the last 5 to 8 years has been tremendous. We have saved South Africa. Imagine if we were to run South Africa through a coalition at national level. The checks and balances would automatically be put in place. And we invest more on training the civil service, train the military, train the police. At least the professionalism is lacking in those areas. You can't expect service delivery if you don't have qualified administrators. I'm sorry, but this is where I would be focusing.
And we'll take some questions from the audience now, so think about your questions. Nomboniso.
One of the important things that the General has raised, which I want to respond to, is this service delivery thing. I dislike the concept because it suggests a passive relationship on the side of those who are receiving. I think that the words that we use, we must choose the words very carefully. And this is not an attack on you. We all do this. These people who take out into the streets are not protesting because they are clients who are waiting passively for things to be delivered. It is social and political protest. And it's important that we name it as such. When people protest against water not being available, when people march to their councillors' houses, it's a political and social expression. And if we get these concepts and try and take away this technicalization of the politics, it's going to be very important because it says to people, we understand your struggle. We understand what you are communicating. It goes back to what Sipho was saying about the dignity of people. Sometimes language is also about humanization. It is also about agency.
Katy, have I switched off my...
Okay, there you go.
Yes, people are fed up with politicians. But importantly, the moment has come when people should get politicians in their place. They are not our bosses, they are our servants. Politicians need to understand that they are servants of the people, and to the extent that they don't serve the people, they shouldn't be in the roles in which they occupy. The problem that we have here is this notion that we all clear off the way with the blue light brigades when these politicians come, and we treat them like our masters and all of that. It is important to change that relationship. One of the biggest mistakes that happened in this country is that in 1994 we demobilized the forces that liberated this country, and that's the mass democratic movement. You need to return that energy of a people who say, we have given you a mandate as it is articulated in the Constitution. We do not appreciate that we still have these high levels of poverty, this large gap between rich and poor, and that you have all of these kind of problems that we're having. To the extent that we have that, it means you have failed the people and that you need to be removed from the position of power. That is the relationship that has to be changed.
They are not our bosses, they are our servants. Let's take some questions, if we could put the lights up. I see a few hands on this side here. If you could give the mic.
Thank you. My name is Tumelo, and I think one of the missed opportunities by both the panel and our societies to discuss and really deliberate on the character of society that we envisage. We know, for an example, that we aspire for a democratic state. Unfortunately, one of the things that we've done was to stop at political democratization and failed to take that democratization a step further and discuss about the economic democratization. and see a state as a custodian of its people that can be able to dispense economic benefits for its people. Education, health, mineral resources, your mines, your banks, and so forth should be socialized, and they should speak to the democratic principles of the state. We can furthermore take it further and say that is our society democratic, and in our artifacts that we see, our socialization, are we a state of Europe away from Europe? What is our conversation about decolonization? So I would have expected from the panel really to speak about, when talking about the character of the state, to really encapsulate those particular things and move away from talking about the individual in the same way that Zimbabwe is doing and falling in the pitfalls of replacing as Mugabe with another character that just continues from the same characterization. I thank you.
Thank you, Tumelo. Does anybody want to take that?
Yes.
Yes.
There is no doubt that there is a need for the government to do more. That is the challenge of our time, especially in looking at addressing the backlogs and imbalances of the past, so that we can all realize that dream which was announced in 1994, that we are committed to improve the quality of life for all. There's nothing wrong in what he is saying. That's a kind of frustration which Nomboniso was explaining earlier on.
You know, Katy, I think that that's a very important conversation, and I want to be controversial here and reject this notion that we're incremental in our approach to the liberation of this country. There was never a decision taken somewhere that says we'll have political liberation first and then economic liberation after. It's a misconception. After all, one of the first pieces of legislation that President Nelson Mandela passed in his tenure was the expropriation of all national resources as belonging to the state, and that anybody who exploits those does that on a permission granted by the state, on terms and conditions decided by the state. You can question whether those terms and conditions in fact advance the interests of what we refer to as socialization of economic interests. So I think there's a lot of conversation that needs to be had there. As somebody in the mining industry, I think that the transformation of the mining industry is a societal imperative. I totally disagree with Minister Msebenzi Zwane's approach to it. But I think that there is a big conversation to be had with people who think that the resources of this country need to be socialized for the benefit of wider society. What does that mean in real terms? And secondly, the whole Bill of Rights in South Africa speaks not only to social rights, it speaks to economic rights. It is about entrenchment and location of ordinary citizens in this country to an agenda that includes them in the development of the economy. That large numbers of South Africans are excluded is, in fact, a betrayal of the fundamental principles around the vision of a future South Africa. And we need to talk about that, and I think that the convention that General Holomisa is talking about should begin to address exactly those issues. And please, I hope you don't misunderstand me to suggest that our constitution is without its imperfections. It has lots of shortcomings. But I think we need to start looking at what are the things that it offers for us to deal with the issues of economic marginalization, economic exclusion, and all of that, inequalities that continue to divide us, etc., etc. I believe that there are a great deal of tools in the South African Constitution to enable us to address a whole range of issues that we confront today.
In fact, the report, which I really would like people to urge people to read, the report that has been submitted in Parliament that looks into various legislation, one of the important recommendations or observations that it makes is that let's take the issue of the land question. It says very clearly that the problems around land are not about the constitution. The problems around land, because Section 25.3 makes it very clear, makes it possible to address some of these things. The problems are about lack of political will, about not wanting to get the Constitutional Court, approach the Constitutional Court to say, can you help us, we are stuck here. And there's no way that the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform or the presidents or anybody can do that at the moment, because the processes are stuck. Nobody can explain where all the money is. It is a problem when a country like ours doesn't have an overarching legislation in terms of what is it that we mean when we talk about the land. It is a problem when a country like ours continues to have this triumvirate that is dominant in society, and that's a triumvirate of an exploitative relationship between traditional leaders who milk money out of their communities, mining companies like Lonmin, who take absolutely no responsibility for the kinds of environmental degradation that they do, and the political elite that benefits from this. So it is in fixing these kinds of things, and we've got the tools. So when we're not, the reason we're not talking about the kind of state that we want, it's because actually the Constitution is very clear about this, and I think we need to go back to those basics and look at what is wrong. What is wrong is implementation and the kind of interpretation that we put into the law.
I'd love to go on and on and on. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, so we can't take any more questions. It's sped by. Thank you very much for your time. Let's please give these panelists a huge round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sipho, Pityana, General Bantu, Holomisa, and Nomboniso, Gasa, we thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
I'm just going to work out the timing with the other speaker.
Lots of food for thought there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just when we're warming up.
Just when we're warming up. That's exactly right. Just when we're warming up.
We've got a little more time. If you want to do some more questions, we have some time.
We have more time.
You have more time.
Oh, we have more time. Okay.
You have more time. Sorry.
I was getting the wrap up.
You've got another 10 minutes, so yeah, all good.
Let's take some questions from this side of the hall.
Hi.
Hi, there we go.
Hi, my name is Vashti. We've been talking about new political leadership like we're going to find some diamonds in the rough, but we have to deal with the fact that our society is quite a broken place, and that's the same society that's teaching those potential leaders. So is there something that we should do for the future of South Africa about the compassion problem that we have, so that when we do have leaders, they aren't quite so tempted when they ascend to power?
Do we have a problem with compassion in South Africa? Who wants to take that?
They must take it.
Oh, why? Do politicians not have compassion?
No,
Clearly not, he says.
Not because of that. I think I'm conflicted on that.
Okay.
I actually think that's a very important issue, because we tend to look at what is done on a bigger scale and on a larger scale, and at an ideological level, at a political level. And really, people live their lives from 1 minute to the next. And it is when we try to find ways of humanizing, firstly, ourselves, and also humanizing those with whom we disagree, that we can be able to get a political class that has empathy and that has compassion. It is when we also challenge the mindset in society, which actually says that if you get into a political position, then you are a big man or a big woman. So I think what is important here, and I like this question around compassion, because it means you see the other human being. You see the other human being as worthy of a life that is better, a life that is decent, as you are. And if we don't sort this out, we are going to have massive problems. But here's also something else that goes with that, is to say that, look, everybody says we should have a commission of inquiry on state capture, we must have this, we must have that, we must have these hearings, we must have... None of those things are actually going to give us this thing that we want, which is called accountability. What is really going to... South Africans need a shock. Corrupt South Africans need a shock of actually getting chains and going to jail and losing position, so that we can understand that when you do not treat people and the resources that don't belong to you in the way that they are supposed to, you will face very difficult consequences.
How then, very quickly, Nomboniso, did you respond when you heard a senior public official say, I'm not the Minister of Toilets, when confronted with the death of 6-year-old Michael?
I was angry and said so at that time. I was very angry, in the same way that I was angry when a lawyer representing the state said in the Michael case about the family, said this family wants to get rich at the, from the death of this young boy. And it is that level of inability to empathize, to humanize other people, to understand that you cannot say these kinds of things about other people. But she can say that because she knows there are no consequences. She can say that because she doesn't see these people as human beings in the same way. That's a level of arrogance. It's a crass arrogance that we have. And we need to remind people and ourselves, and I include myself in this, that you may have been very brave and courageous before, but respect and reputation is earned and destroyed every day. So I don't give a damn right now whether a particular minister was in jail for 15 years. If he behaves in a way that disrespects people, that's what we should judge them on at this point.
Well, a bigger indictment is a president that tolerates a minister who says that.
Yep.
A bigger indictment still is a political party that appointed that person to parliament who becomes a minister, allows that person to say that. In allowing them to say that without consequences, it means that they are enjoined in that statement and they agree with it. And that is unacceptable.
Let's take a question there, General.
We may have to seriously consider campaigning for the introduction of a new electoral system where we can improve accountability by introducing constituency-based as well as to work with the current system. And also to say we want to have power to elect our own president, not a president who is just going to be accountable only to his or her NEC and forget about the population. Food for thought.
My name is Johnny. I have a series of very brief questions that I'd like the panel to respond to.
Unfortunately, we can't do a series. We can only do one.
No, they're short. They're all
right.
pinned together. Number one, the electoral conference. Is there a mechanism where if JZ doesn't see the result that he wants, and we all know what he wants, if he feels it's not going to happen, can he cancel the electoral conference? And number two, Mr. Ramaphosa was on the NEC. Does the panel, you said the NEC are all responsible for electing and protecting Zuma. Does the panel include in that number Cyril Ramaphosa as equally culpable for not recalling him? And can the electoral conference be cancelled if it's going the wrong way for JZ?
Thank you. Is Cyril Ramaphosa somebody who you think needs to be held more accountable?
Firstly, I don't think the JZ can unilaterally cancel the ANC conference. And we are not in a game of sangomas here, because we wouldn't know whether he would say, yes, I'm going to win on my candidate. I think they are doing well to say over 90% of their branches are ready to go to the Congress. That's positive. Cyril Ramaphosa and many others in Parliament, in their caucus, in the NEC, they have defended President Zuma. We have been witnesses. So yes, it's part of them. Then we cannot take them serious when they go out and say, I'm going to fight corruption. You remember the word corruption in 1995 when I was still in the ANC? It was a taboo to mention the word corruption, hence I was shown the door. But today, even the main suspects are masquerading and parading and saying, we are going to fight corruption. All of them. Can't believe them.
Nomboniso?
We are not, it's not possible to get a candidate who is not tainted, who's going to lead the ANC. Nobody is going to come from the sky and lead the ANC. So I think what is important is to try and figure out who is likely to cause more damage and who's likely to cause less damage, and what are the conditions that can be around that. None of us make those decisions. The ANC will make those decisions for itself. However, what is important, I think, is for us as citizens to say, listen, here and no further, and whoever you are. On the issue of culpability, I agree completely. I mean, a lot of people, who are now saying, this is wrong and this is wrong, you kind of think, okay, you've got such a high tolerance, actually, of corruption. And why are you saying this now? So that the ANC can sort itself on that one. We will judge them on how they behave in relation to society.
If we don't think that politicians are being held accountable, how can the people gathered in this room, what do they need to do, rather, to hold them accountable?
Well, first of all, I think that it's still possible to sabotage the ANC conference. And I can't imagine that President Zuma and his lot who are on the back foot are not going to do everything possible to make sure that a candidate other than their favored candidate wins. So the jury is out until that conference is done and dusted. I believe that South Africans have actually been doing a great deal already, but the biggest enemy that we face today is not even a dominant ANC that will continue making these false promises that it's making under a corrupt leadership. The biggest enemy we face is a complacent and laid-back South African populace that is prepared to take it and lying down. That is the biggest challenge that we face. The work that we've done so far of rising up and speaking out and taking corrupt politicians to court and raising matters through opposition political parties and marching on the streets, and indeed media playing the role that it has been playing in informing South Africans about the extent of the rot in the system, etc., etc. Those are the things that we have to do until a corrupt government is out of power. We may not rest until we remove a corrupt government from power. It doesn't matter what complexion it comes in. It is not just Jacob Zuma who's corrupt. The corruption in the ANC is systemic as it is entrenched.
Just on a quick thing about holding politicians accountable, I just want to emphasize this, that one of the ways in which we can try and envision the future is by also widening our lenses and look beyond that which is in our line of vision. The truth of the matter is that there are South Africans who have been doing tremendous work, especially in rural areas, who have stopped terrible legislation, who have who live with intimidation, people who don't sleep in their houses as we speak. And these struggles have been going on at least since 2009. And it's important that when we talk about how do we hold politicians accountable, that we actually also acknowledge the fact that there are very, very poor people who have risked everything and made sure that the road doesn't go as far as it could have without them.
Thank you. We've got time for 2 more questions. Here we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. You already asked the question for me in terms of what is it that we can do. My name is Mudieri, especially for those who are sitting on that platform who know me. Madlamini. Guys, I'm talking to the room here. The best thing we can do for ourselves is to rise as civil society. We cannot let them lead us anymore. They have failed us. We have been failed. Nomboniso knows I was much thinner. She was much prettier when we were. God's truth. Sipho knows, I know his elder brother. The truth is they have failed us. We can do better for ourselves. Let's get up. Let's not allow people to be counting black, white on our marches. Let's forge it and go and work hard. Let's move. Don't wait for 2019. Let's move and get going. Tatu Holomisa. Madlamini, Mrs. Kumar. When are we having this national convention? Yes. Can you see we are missing these conversations? We don't talk as South Africans anymore, which is why the enemy talking us out, counting hairs on our head, telling us we are black, we are white, is managing to forge this segregation. I hate it when in 2017 people start talking about like that to us. We fought apartheid. And we are not going to fight it in 2017. We have other issues to fight. I don't want my children to be fighting about economic freedom in 2017. They are so right. They are educated. They are not working. They are right to talking about economic freedom. It's an indictment on me as their mother that they should be fighting for it now. Please, guys, let's start talking and having purposeful conversations, and let's move, please.
Is there a timeline? Thank you.
After the opposition parties had endorsed the problem statement, the next phase now is to engage the sectors of our civil society in a roundtable discussion to say this is the vision we have. Can we be part of this? The aim is to have this national convention to take resolutions. And I hope that the ruling party could be part of that. Those resolutions must go straight to Parliament, go straight to union building for implementation. It must not be a talk shop. We can't wait for them until they hand over baton in 2019. If we are not moving fast as a nation, including the ANC, we are already witnessing some signs that we are marching towards the second revolution. When the people resist the security forces and fight back and take weapons and hijack their cars, no, please, man, please. Let's do something.
What's your deadline for this to actually happen?
Well, we aim that this convention should be around March, April next year.
I want you to hold him to that. March, April next year. Let's see. Let's see. We did say one more question at the very back. I see the microphone is right there.
Sipho, as a representative of Business South Africa there, today I've heard a lot of speak about political responsibility, and I think that analysis has been astute. However, I think it's also astute to point out that there's more that corporate South Africa can do, and the corporate space is very untransformed. It's white male dominated, and I don't think that corporate South Africa and every corporate leader who's here today, CSR seems to me like a moral massage that you give yourselves. the bare minimum that is done to say we're doing our bit for South Africa. Let's get rid of Zuma. So my realistic question is, what more can you do to bring corporate South Africa to the party? Because realistically, the ANC is going to be in charge for the next 5 years. And I don't think that leaders can sit back and say, well, if only we had gotten rid of Cyril or NDZ or whoever else is supposed to come from this proverbial sky. What can the leaders in this room do for young start-up South Africans, young students who want to learn, people who are in the townships trying to get redress? What are you going to do as a business leader with these connections to achieve that for South Africa?
Thank you very much. Sipho, Pityana, very quickly from you, corporate South Africa.
Well, corporate South Africa has to come to the party, and I agree that it hasn't quite, because it hasn't articulated how it will make its contribution in creating shared value, which is part of the underlying articulation in our South African Constitution. Every aspect around the economic transformation that we've been talking about has been met with huge resistance from corporate South Africa. So it's an area of contestation. But I dare start by saying that the blueprint that has shaped the thinking of corporate South Africa in regard to how we effect economic inclusion of the marginalized, which is black economic empowerment, is a discredited project. We have to go back to the drawing board and look very critically, because that framework has played no small role in the creation of the concentration of wealth, has played no small role in the manifestation of corruption in the way that it has. So how should corporate South Africa play a role in this? I think that in my interactions with many young people who've got very good ideas about what they want to do, who are encountering a lot of frustrations about taking the very first step to realize fantastic goals that see the light of day in many parts of the world, find huge amounts of obstacles. And the reason why it is possible to break, if you like, the dominance of corporate South Africa from enabling the youth and the new ideas that are emerging from happening is because you have a weak state. So to the extent that you have a weak government, it makes for a permissive environment for things that are adverse to the vision of this country to happen. So in my view, it starts with fixing government. It starts with having a credible state. It starts with having a state that has a vision and a program that will ensure that corporate South Africa can speak to how it plays its part in that process.
Thank you very much. This has been a fantastic panel. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I love what they've had to say. We really are up for time now. Please give them a huge round of applause.